At my sister's $1.2 million wedding in the Hamptons, surrounded by crystal chandeliers and gold-rimmed china. The waiter hesitated before placing my dinner in front of me. It wasn't the lobster thermidor everyone else was eating. It was a bright blue plastic plate. On it sat a single, cold, half-eaten slice of pizza and a lukewarm juice box. But the real kick was underneath. A handwritten note from my mother. Brenda. It was an invoice. $500 for a last-minute seating fee. From the head table, my sister Diamond raised her champagne glass and winked. That was the moment. The exact second I decided to burn it all down. Before I tell you how I turned that invoice into a lawsuit that cost them $5 million, drop a comment telling me what is the pettiest thing a family member has ever done to you. I'm reading every single one. I didn't gasp. I didn't let a single tear ruin my makeup. Tears are for people who are surprised. And looking at that cold slice of pizza, I realized I wasn't surprised at all. I was just done. I reached into my clutch and pulled out my phone. I didn't hide what I was doing. I held it directly over the plate. Portrait mode. High definition. I wanted to capture every congealed grease stain on the pepperoni. I wanted the blue plastic to pop against the white linen tablecloth. I made sure my mother's handwriting on that invoice was perfectly legible. $500. A seating fee. As if I were a last-minute addition to a conference. Not the sister of the bride. The flash didn't go off. But the image was burned into the cloud forever. Evidence. Then, I opened my messages. There was only one active thread. The recipient was sitting at the head table, looking dashing in a custom tuxedo that cost more than my car. Preston. The groom. I typed one word. Now. I watched him across the room. He didn't look at me. He simply checked his phone, took a sip of his sparkling water, and gave a barely perceptible nod to the waiter refilling his glass. That was the signal. The safety was off. I stood up. My chair scraped against the parquet floor. A harsh sound in the hum of polite conversation. But nobody turned around. Why would they? To the 200 guests in this tent, I was nobody. I was the stain in the corner. I was the charity case Brenda complained about over martinis at the country club. I smoothed the front of my dress. It wasn't designer. It was off the rack. Paid for with the small allowance I kept from my own earnings before Brenda siphoned the rest away. I picked up my clutch and began to walk. I didn't head for the exit. That's what they expected. They expected me to run to the parking lot, cry in my car, and fade away like I had for 29 years. They expected the ghost to disappear. Instead, I walked toward the stage. As I passed the tables, I mentally tallied the cost of everything I saw. The centerpieces were white orchids imported from Thailand. $600 a table, paid for by Chapter 4 of The Gilded Cage. The bestseller Diamond claimed she wrote during a spiritual retreat in Bali. She had actually been in Vegas. I wrote Chapter 4 in the laundry room while waiting for the dryer to finish. The Champagne Tower. $3,000. Paid for by the film option rights. Rights to a story I bled onto the page while Diamond was getting lip filler. The vintage chandeliers hanging from the tent ceiling. $10,000 rental fee. Paid for by the foreign rights sales in Germany and France. Every single inch of this $1.2 million fantasy was paved with my words, my keystrokes, my sleepless nights. And in return, they gave me a juice box and a bill. The irony tasted metallic in my mouth. They were celebrating a career that didn't exist, honoring a talent Diamond didn't possess, and spending money that belonged to the woman they had seated next to the kitchen trash. I reached the edge of the dance floor. Diamond was laughing, throwing her head back so the light would catch her diamond necklace. She looked radiant. She looked victorious. She thought she had won. She thought she had successfully erased me from the narrative, reduced me to a prop that she could bill for existing. She didn't notice me walking past the cake. She didn't notice me slip behind the heavy velvet curtains that hid the audiovisual production team. The AV tech, a guy named Mike I'd spoken to earlier that morning, looked up as I entered the dim booth. He looked nervous. He glanced at the stage, then at me. "You ready?" he whispered. I looked at the laptop connected to the massive LED screens flanking the stage. The screens were currently cycling through a slideshow of Diamond and Preston's engagement photos, fake smiles. Fake chemistry. Fake perfection. I reached into my bag and pulled out a flash drive. It was heavy. Cold metal. I'm ready, I said. Plug it in. As Mike loaded the files, time seemed to stretch, pulling me back into the dark. Not the dim light of the AV booth, but the damp, suffocating darkness of the basement where I spent my 20s. You have to understand. I didn't just wake up one day and decide to let them use me. I was groomed for it. My mother, Brenda, named us like she was writing a prophecy. Diamond. Hard. Brilliant. Unbreakable. Valuable. And me, Charity. A virtue. An act of giving to those in need. A tax write-off. From the time I could hold a pencil. Brenda taught me the rules of our universe. Diamond was the sun. And I was the gravity that held her in place. Invisible. Heavy. And necessary only so she didn't float away. Psychologists call it the trap of normalized cruelty. It's a cage without bars. Brenda didn't lock me in that basement. She did something far more effective. She convinced me that living in the dark was my noble purpose. She would stroke my hair and say, "You are the roots. Charity. Roots have to live in the dirt so the flower can bloom. Without you, your sister would wither." I believed her. I believed that my suffering was the price of her success, and that paying it made me good. It made me worthy. So, while Diamond was out partying in Ibiza or networking in Manhattan, I was underground. Literally. My office was a converted storage room under my parents' house. It smelled of mildew and old paper. The only window was a thin slit at the top of the wall that looked out onto the driveway. I learned to tell time by the sound of Diamond's tires crunching on the gravel coming home at 4 in the morning. Leaving at noon for brunch. I wrote The Gilded Cage. Her debut bestseller. In 19 days. My fingers bled. I drank coffee until my hands shook so bad I could barely type. I poured my soul. My loneliness. My desperate need to be seen into that manuscript. When it hit the New York Times list, Brenda threw a gala. Diamond wore a gold sequin dress that cost $4,000. She stood on a stage, weeping, thanking the muse that whispers in my ear. I was at the back of the room, wearing a headset, telling the caterers when to bring out the shrimp. I remember watching her that night. She looked so beautiful. She looked so happy. And for a second, I felt a swell of pride. I thought, I did that. I made her shine. Brenda found me later, hiding in the kitchen. She didn't hug me. She handed me a glass of warm tap water and said, "Don't look so smug. Charity. A ghost is only useful if no one sees it. Go check the coats." That was the trap. They fed on my talent. And when I was drained, they shamed me for being empty. They convinced me that my words were only valuable if they came out of Diamond's mouth. They made me an accomplice in my own erasure. But looking at that invoice tonight, that $500 demand for a seat at a table, I paid for something snapped. The cage door swung open. I wasn't the roots. I was the engine. And an engine can drive a car. Or it can drive a tank. I looked at Mike. The loading bar on his screen hit 100%. "It's ready," he whispered. "Good," I said, my voice cold. "Let's start the show." To understand why I didn't hesitate to blow up my own sister's wedding, you have to see what happened 30 minutes before I walked into that tent. The reception was about to start. I was heading toward the seating chart, foolishly looking for my name, when a hand clamped around my upper arm. It was a manicured claw. My mother. She didn't say hello. She didn't compliment my dress. She dragged me into the small, air-conditioned trailer reserved for the bridal party. Diamond was there, touching up her lipstick in the vanity mirror. She didn't turn around. "We need to handle some housekeeping," Brenda said. She locked the door. She reached into her purse and slapped a document onto the makeup counter. It was thick. Legal bond paper. I recognized the font. It was an intellectual property release and waiver. Read it, Brenda commanded. Actually, don't bother. I'll summarize. It states that you, Charity, acknowledge that you served merely as a typist for Diamond's works. It states that you have no claim to copyright, royalties, or creative credit for The Gilded Cage, or any future sequels. It retroactively assigns all rights to Diamond Holdings. LLC. I stared at the paper. You want me to sign away my life's work, now, before dinner? The movie studio needs a clean chain of title before they wire the option money on Monday, Brenda said, her voice devoid of emotion. We can't have you popping up later claiming you wrote it just because you typed it up. I didn't just type it, Mother. I created it. Semantics, Brenda snapped. She uncapped a heavy Mont Blanc pen and held it out. Sign it. And if I don't? Brenda smiled. It was a terrifying expression. Then you leave. Right now. You don't get a seat. You don't get dinner. And don't think about coming home for Christmas. If you walk out that door without signing, you are dead to this family. We will cut you off completely. I looked at Diamond. She caught my eye in the mirror and shrugged. Just sign it. Charity. Don't be dramatic. It's my big day. Do you really want to ruin it over some scribbles? My heart hammered against my ribs. But then, I remembered the phone call I'd had with Preston 3 days ago. He had predicted this. They're greedy. He had told me, they'll want to close the loop before the wedding night. He had told me exactly what to do. Sign it, he had said. But use your confirmation name as your middle initial. Your legal ID doesn't have a middle name. It creates a discrepancy we can use to tie them up in court for years while I execute the main plan. I took the pen. My hand didn't shake. I bent over the counter, avoiding the powder spilled by Diamond's brush, and signed the document. Charity R. Whitmore. The R stood for Rose, a name that existed only on a church certificate from when I was 12, and nowhere on my birth certificate or tax forms. I handed the pen back. Brenda checked the signature. Satisfied. She didn't notice the extra initial. She just saw submission. She folded the contract and tucked it into her purse like it was a receipt for dry cleaning. Good choice, she said. Now, go find your table. We squeezed you in near the back. As I turned to the door, Diamond laughed. It was a light, tinkling sound, like breaking glass. Oh. And Charity, she called out. I saw the menu. The caterer ran out of the lobster for the vendor tables. Make sure you eat the crusts on that pizza. You know how you love leftovers. I didn't look back. I walked out of that trailer and into the cool evening air. I felt lighter than I had in years. They thought they had just secured their fortune. They didn't realize they had just signed their own eviction notice. I checked my watch. 20 minutes to showtime. Eat the crusts, I whispered to myself. No. Diamond. I think I'll eat the whole damn cake. The lights in the tent dimmed, plunging 200 guests into a hushed twilight. A single spotlight hit the center stage, where Brenda stood, clutching a microphone like it was a scepter. She wore a champagne-colored gown that probably cost more than my entire education. Tears practiced. Elegant tears shimmered in her eyes. My Diamond, she began, her voice trembling just enough to be touching without ruining her mascara. From the moment you were born, I knew you were destined for greatness. You didn't just walk, you glided. You didn't just speak, you told stories that captivated the world. Your genius is a gift from God. And watching you build this empire with your own 2 hands has been the greatest privilege of my life. Applause rippled through the tent. Diamond dabbed her eyes with a lace handkerchief. Looking every inch, the humble artist. I stood up. I didn't wait for the applause to die down. I walked to the microphone stand at the edge of the stage. The one reserved for the best man. Excuse me, I said. My voice wasn't loud, but the sound system carried it to every corner of the tent. I have a special presentation for the bride. Brenda frowned, confused. She hadn't approved a speech from me. But before she could intervene, I nodded to Mike in the booth. The massive LED screens behind the head table flickered to life. The guests leaned forward, expecting a montage of baby photos or romantic clips of Diamond and Preston in Paris. Instead, a spreadsheet appeared. It was an Excel file, projected in high definition. The first column was titled Royalties, The Gilded Cage. The second column, Transfer to Shell Corp. B. Whitmore Holdings. The third column, Wedding Vendor Payments. A murmur of confusion swept through the room. "What is this?" Diamond hissed, her smile freezing. "This," I said, my voice calm and amplified, "is the accounting for tonight's event. You see, everyone thinks Diamond wrote a bestseller, but Diamond has never written anything longer than a caption." The screen switched to a grainy video filmed in our basement 3 years earlier. It showed me, exhausted, typing at a laptop while Diamond lounged nearby on her phone. Her voice rang out clearly. "Just finish the chapter. Charity. I have a photo shoot at noon. And don't forget the part about the orphans. People love orphans." Gasps rippled through the tent. Brenda dropped her microphone as feedback shrieked. "Turn it off!" she screamed, rushing the AV booth. But Mike had locked the door. "And now for the encore," I said. The screen changed to emails. Subject: paternity test results. Probability of paternity: 0% for Preston Vance. 99.9% for Richard Vance. Richard Vance, the man who had just walked Diamond down the aisle. Preston's stepfather. Silence collapsed the room. Diamond screamed that it was fake. "It's not," I said. "And neither is the lawsuit I filed this morning." She shrieked, hurling a champagne glass at the screen. Brenda pounded helplessly on the locked door. The guests sat frozen, witnessing the destruction of a family in real time. Then Preston stood, calmly. He buttoned his tuxedo and faced the room. "The show is over." He handed me a document. "At 9 this morning, my firm acquired Skylark Publishing. I now own the catalog, the Diamond Whitmore trademark, and the copyright investigation into the Gilded Cage." Diamond collapsed. "I know Charity wrote every word," Preston continued. "All royalties are now redirected to the true author, Diamond. You're in breach of contract for fraud." "The prenup," Brenda whispered. "Void," Preston said. "So is the marriage." He slid annulment papers across the table. Then he turned to Richard. "My mother changed the locks. Your bags are outside." Finally, Preston placed an invoice in Brenda's shaking hands. $1.2 million. Since there was no marriage, I canceled the payment. He offered me his arm, ready to go. Charity. We walked out together. By morning, Brenda and Diamond were socially erased. Clubs revoked memberships. Publishers cut ties. Diamond tried to cry victim online until Preston shut down her accounts. The lawsuit ended in a rapid settlement. A week later, Preston slid me a check across a cafe table. $5 million. I used it to found the Ghostwriters Shield Fund, a legal defense trust for exploited creatives. I didn't just defeat them. I replaced them. Today, I live by the ocean. I open my laptop and type a title. Beneath it, 2 words. By Charity Rose. To anyone told they were just background, you are the author. They can steal credit and money. They cannot steal your voice unless you let them. Pick up the pen. Write yourself back into the center of your story.